Right, we're ready to paint now. We have our 3 colours mixed. Don't think that this painting is going to be you just dabbing your brushes into the paint palette. You need to mix them. You need to make up quite a bit of the paint to get the pigment in it, because you don't want it to be too washy straight away. You want to be able to remove some pigment rather than having to add it on once it's all dried. This is the brush that I'm going to be using for most of it. It's a huge brush. There's also another one that I'll be using. It's called a mop brush for obvious reasons. It hasn't got a point. It's a bit like a very small blusher brush, and this smaller brush that it looks like I've mixed paint with it at some point, but it's about the same size as the brush that you'd have at college. Now, I don't expect you all to have a huge brush like this, but it's going to be difficult to get paint all over your painting before it dries with a small brush like this. So if you've got a sponge or something that you can use instead of a brush to apply the paint really quickly, that would be better than this. You're going to get a nice with a bigger brush, you're going to get a nice area where the colours mix and it won't dry so quickly. Okay, before I start, really obvious thing to say, but it's often something that people forget. The paint will only travel where the paper's wet. Okay, it won't travel to where the paper's dry unless you push it towards it. So if, for instance, I was to paint an area with just clear water and then added paint to where that water was, the paint would just find its way where the water was lying on the paper. So with that in mind, we need to think about, is there any areas that we're not going to paint at all, and should we just go with it? Should we just see what happens? Okay, so what I've decided to do is we are going to go straight in with the yellow ochre, and we're going to be quite, remember, we're confident about the fact that this ink will not run, so we're okay with that. Okay, so plenty of ink. We're going to, sorry, not ink, watercolour paint. We're going to bring it down a bit. Okay, we're going to now add some burnt umber. Don't expect your first try to be great. Okay, this is the first time I've tried this technique, and I've done a fair few watercolour paintings, and even I'm feeling a little bit unsure about what's going to happen. But sometimes, you know, you just got to go with it. You just got to think, okay, let's do it, let's see what happens. I'm not paying too much attention to the tone. I'm going to let the ink do that more. So mind you, I am moving it over there, aren't I? I suppose it wouldn't hurt to have some areas where it sort of tried to describe tone a little bit more. Now I'm going to wash my brush, dampen it off, and you see these edges, I'm going to pull them down a little bit. Because I don't want too many hard edges. See how that's pooling there? That's fine. Also, don't worry if you're thinking, oh my god, it's so dark. Watercolour paints will dry lighter, so it's better to go dark early on. See there, I might add a little bit of burnt sienna in a bit. Let's go over some of these edges. I might keep that little bit there, quite like that bit. See what I mean about the paint? The wet paint will go where you pull it with a wet brush or where it's wet on the surface already. Wow, look at that. Oh my goodness me. Look at that. See how that paint is just going, finding its own way. Ooh, that's nice. Look at that blue. I'm just going to move it about a bit. You could hold up your watercolour pad and let the paint run. And then see what happens. It's going a bit greenish in places, which is quite nice, which means I probably won't bother with the sap green now. Right. Remember that this can be lifted as well. You can actually lift watercolour paint while once it's dried. If you haven't got watercolour paints and you have got acrylic paints, then that's okay. You can, if you thin the acrylics down enough, you can use them like watercolour paints. The only thing is you might not be able to lift them once they're dry as well as watercolours. I love this area here. I love the blue and the orange together like that. Okay, we was thinking of adding a bit of burnt sienna. Let's go for it. Add a bit of burnt sienna somewhere. It kind of looks a little bit like these places up here, doesn't it? This colour. And you know, you make decisions all the time, don't you? Even if you decided to do one thing, you're there in the moment, and then you try something else and you think, yeah, that's okay. I didn't even get to use my mop brush, did I? Sometimes brushes can be quite expensive. This brush was actually quite expensive, but it's just so useful, it's so versatile that I don't mind paying the price, because it's worth having this brush than, I don't know, it's So for instance, I can get a really fine point with that point there, and I can cover quite a lot of space at the same time. Well, not at the same time, but with the same brush. Okay, I don't want to fiddle too much. I quite like these areas. I'm going to let it dry. I'm going to see what it looks like once it's dry. I feel as if I do too much, I'm going to ruin these areas. Or do I? Do I add a little bit more brown? Let's add a little bit more brown in place. Oh, I've gone quiet. Sometimes it's difficult. You've got to remember to breathe, let alone talk. Okay, I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to mess with it anymore. I'm going to leave it to dry, see what it looks like when it's dry, because it'll probably look a lot lighter when it's dry, and I might go over some of the areas with the ink on, but I'm going to see what it looks like then. Okay, right.